Welcome to Motivated to Lead podcast, helping you become a better leader. I'm your host, Mark Klingsheim. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us again for our podcast this week. My name is Mark Klingsheim with SEMA Partners. Each week, we interview leaders and they share lessons learned from their careers. Our goal is to help you become a better leader. This week, we're happy to have joined us Aidan Kehoe. Aidan is the founder and he was the CEO of SKOUT, which was a cybersecurity company that was sold to Barracuda Networks. And he has a great background as an entrepreneur. He's been a board member of both private and public companies, both in the U.S. and internationally. He has just some great thoughts he's going to share. We're going to talk about technology and some of the trends that are going on. And he's also going to share kind of his story and some of the lessons that he's learned throughout his career. Looking forward to our conversation today with Aidan. It's great to have Aidan joining us for our conversation today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mark. It's exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I heard your TED Talk that you gave some time ago. And so I heard a little bit of your background story and I'd love to have you share just a little bit of your story and a little bit of your career story.
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for being on here. And I think my story is a story of good fortune and being in the right place at the right time. I grew up in Ireland and, part of a big family and always had the will to move to America. Ever since I can remember, wanted to live the American dream. And so I came over when I was 23 and, worked cleaning dishes in a restaurant and, managed to figure out how I got a work visa. And so I have I believe the immigration challenges we face in the US are because a lot of people want to come and live here and nobody wants to leave. And that's a whole other kind of conversation, but very fortunate to meet people who helped me. And one person, his name is Michael Pascucci. He pioneered the concept of car leasing. So I went to work in his businesses and I launched an insurance business with him. And then I launched a cyber company and I ended up partnering with Steve Ross, who owns the Miami Dolphins and the largest real estate developer in the world, and Matt Higgins from RC Ventures. So mine is a story of really good fortune to meet really amazing people who helped me along the way. And thankfully, things have worked out.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
So if we were to spin back time, knowing with what you know now, what advice would you give that 22-year-old right before you came to the U.S.? What would you tell Aidan?
I would say two things. One is I would say, don't worry, it's all going to work out. And the second thing would be bet big on yourself. So I think, when you're an immigrant and you come to the US, you have, I had, success on a pedestal, and obviously my definition of success has dramatically changed, where it's now all about humanity to me, right? And I think there's a lack of that in the world today. But I think young people today have different challenges than maybe I did when, whatever it was 17 years ago now. And I think, bet big on yourself is one of those ones that, Steve Ross has a great line where he says, if you bet small and you win, then you've lost. So I think that kind of philosophy, I think, is something I would tell myself to kind of go for it. And I think I did that to an extent, but even to do it even more would be what I would suggest.
So any advice that you received early on that you, looking back on, you should have ignored?
Advice I should have ignored. I think more of an insight around advice is you have to spend more time understanding why someone is giving you the advice and what their experiences are, because it does. I think people give advice with the best of intentions, but it doesn't necessarily. They're all not qualified equally to give you advice, and you find a lot of that when people disagree about the future. So if you look now, there's so many, in my opinion, huge technology trends that are happening that are transformational. But people who are generally in successful positions don't want to do the work to understand how their life is going to change. So I think I probably placed a lot of weight on people's advice that was not necessarily qualified to see the future just because they were successful in the past. Sure. So the best person who I know who has he literally, I think he has a crystal ball, is Matt Higgins, who was my partner from RSC Ventures, and he is just extraordinary at seeing the future. And almost every conversation he's in, I see people having very strong disagreements with him. And because they just, the emotions about that really happening, sometimes some people can't handle. So that would be it. You just got to kind of spend more time to understand, is this person really in a good position to give me this advice or not?
So thinking back to that first leadership position, how long was it in your career that you were managing people? Was it?
It was probably, a couple of years in, not very long, maybe a year or so. And, I think looking back, I probably always ended up with a passion for leadership, and it's really more about serving than leading, right? So it's understanding what do people need, understanding what, sharing with people where we're going, sharing kind of how we're going to get there and how they're going to benefit too. I think the last piece, there's not a lot of time spent on that. I think if you really understand what people are trying to accomplish, every day they wake up and they want to be the hero of their own story, not the hero of yours. So you have to unlock, what does their hero story look and feel like? And I think I tried to do that as best I can. I didn't always succeed, but I definitely tried. And that theme has kind of stayed with me even from the beginning.
Your title of your TEDx talk that you gave is Feeling Safe in Scary Times, and that was in 2019. That was before it was scary.
I know, right? Yeah.
Talk a little bit about just kind of the managing through the last few years, and just we want to jump into some of the trends in the technology side of things, and I'm sure that ties in with that.
Yeah, I think going back to the title for a second. When you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how it ties into leadership and people, unless that foundation is really strong around, do people really feel safe? It doesn't matter what you want to try and do. You got to make sure that's really strong. And there's different things for different people that locks that in. I didn't know. I knew we were probably going to have some turbulence when I gave that talk, but I didn't realize we were going to have what we had. But it turns out a lot of the themes kind of were really important as we went through it. For me personally, it's probably the most difficult time I've ever had. Because while we had a crisis, a humanitarian crisis, we had a global pandemic, we had a racial injustice crisis, we had stuff going on in my own family, and we were all affected at the same time. At the same time, cyber attacks skyrocketed through the roof, and we had clients, and so just from a pure bandwidth and capacity, I had never gone through anything like that. And we're in a security operational business, so it's not just pure software; it's a platform plus people. So I learned a lot. I learned about the resilience you can have. But the other thing, and I think we're starting to see this now in a post kind of pandemic world, there's attacks associated with every crisis. So you can be a physical tax, an emotional tax, a mental tax. And I think we're starting to see things play out now post-pandemic that are going to kind of continue for a long time, mental health being one. And look at how the employer-employee relationship has completely changed now, where pre-pandemic it was, very much like a top-down corner office. Now it's the complete opposite, where, everybody's trying to figure out how they serve their employees in order to attract the best talent. So that dynamic is fully shifted. So, and I think these are some bigger trends that kind of got accelerated through the crisis. But, I remember being with my team, and I was in the middle of the crisis, and we talked about how careers were going to be made or broken based on decisions that we made. But really it was nothing about careers. It was just about how do we protect people, because we're in the business of protecting people in cyber, and also protect our employees and every stakeholder that we have. So Yeah, it was quite a test, and I'm glad I'm not in it right now.
Yeah, sure.
But it doesn't mean that certain things in the threat landscape have changed. But I do think, we're gonna move into an ever learning environment now, where you always have to like push yourself to learn every day and learn more about what's coming and what's required, and the leaders who step up and do the work will soar, and the leaders that don't just won't. I think that gap's going to widen.
So what advice would you give somebody, and a lot of our listeners are first time or new CEOs, and some people are naturally, they have a technical bent to it, and every company, technology is a huge part of their business. What would you say to somebody who's not doesn't understand technology, but is leading maybe others that are more technical? What advice would you give them?
So I was a non-technical founder of a cyber business, and I know a little bit more today than I did when I started, but I think I was laser focused on the customer. So I think it's very difficult to go wrong if you really spend time understanding the customer pain and challenges, not what you think they are, but what they, kind of working together. And sometimes they don't know themselves. So going on that journey and really doing the discovery to understand what pain they are. And if you align with your customer to solve those pain points with your technology or your platform, it's very easy to have a great North Star. When you deviate away from that and you build things that you believe they need, but they don't know they need, it's much more challenging, right? Because oftentimes the market's not ready for it. So if you're a new CEO, I think being really clear on your customers, number one. Secondly, I think a lot of people underestimate the importance of having a strategy. So I think they think strategy maybe for bigger companies, and I think getting that clear. And the third thing that I see a lot of startups really struggle with is writing things down. So when you're small and you can communicate with like a handful of people, the in-person or the verbal or the small team, works really well. But I think it's very, very powerful to force yourself to write things down. And that's been something that, even though it might sound simple, it's actually quite hard to execute on.
Sure.
And it forces people to kind of own their position on things too. And it drives tremendous accountability if you're going to kind of memorialize it. And this is kind of the way we do things around here. And the last point then is around, how does your values drive decision-making, and making sure that, you stick to the things that are non-negotiable to you in terms of the values that support your culture. So that would be kind of the high points, I would say, that are important to get right.
So one of the challenges for a new CEO is working with a board. It's always something, unless you've been a part of an executive team where you've worked with a board. Talk a little bit about that, your experience, and kind of how you would manage that as a new CEO.
I mean, I had an incredible board. Like I had a board of directors and advisors that could be on public companies. So I was very fortunate. Steve Ross is a partner, so he's Forbes, billionaire, incredible person, entrepreneur. Matt Higgins, from Shark Tank, incredible person I mentioned already. I had Alex Weiss and Jay Leak from Clear Sky, the top kind of security investors, and I had Tyler Winkler, who was built SecureWorks, and I had Danielle Pemberton Hurd, who's one of the leaders in diversity-based recruiting in the country, and then Art Coviello, who built RSA, right? So it was quite
a good team,
quite the team, right? But I think the first thing on the board side is it's just as important to recruit board members as it is as your team. In some ways, more important, and they'll only come on board with you if they believe in the vision that you have, no different than employees of the problem you're solving and how you're going to help in the world, and making it fun. Right. So there's a lot, like, it's not fun building these companies. That a lot of the time it's a lot of work. So making sure that they're having a good time, and one of the companies that they want to engage in, I think, is really important. There's a book that was recommended to me by a coach as well about, I'll have to think of the name, about, it's Great Companies Deserve Great Boards. So I'd recommend that for all kind of startup CEOs, because it goes through the different types of functioning boards that you have. You can, one that's a board itself can be in crisis if some of the investors are at odds with some of the other board members. Then you can have kind of high performance boards that are working very well together. And I would start off with a book like that to kind of get a sense for where you are, where your company stage is at, and you need different things. The second thing then is, understanding how the capital structure affects board dynamics. I mean, it's just true. And I think, listening to the painful lessons that you can get from people who know more than you. So, I had some very painful messages from my board, like regularly, but, we welcomed that rigor and it made us better, but it doesn't mean it was easy. And I think having the foresight and humility to understand that these people are trying to help you. So I probably didn't do a great job in the beginning of like taking that feedback and as well as I could have, but I quickly learned that it was going to be in my interest, and they don't need to stay. Like, great board members have lots of options. They don't need to stay with your company. They can go do other things. So
sure.
It's but if you can get them to buy in, it's like really, really powerful. So we did an exercise with Art Coviello that was amazing, where he put us through like our own strategic review every year of our market and of our, the economy, the IT economy, our market, the cyber market, and our approach. And the whole review drove our strategy and drove how we executed every day. And, it was hard work to get it all set up, but we ended up like being just so much better because of it. So, so kind of being, I think, not being afraid to open up to the board members about what's really going on, because they can't really help you unless you're really honest. And that's how I did it anyway. Maybe there's better ways, but that's what worked for me.
Yeah, that's great. So talk a little bit about what trends you see kind of on the horizon in technology, and what should leaders be paying attention to?
Yeah, I think let me talk a little bit first about I think there's the consensus is getting missed a little bit at the moment. So I think this is just in some of my experiences talking to different people. I think people are presuming that a lot of the existence today of we've had some companies that have gone past $1 trillion market cap, and people can't fathom how a company can get that big. I think in 10 years, we're going to have many companies that are past $1 trillion market cap. And the reason for that is there's just some structural changes that are happening that are going to unleash innovation that we can't even perceive right now. And just to list a couple, artificial intelligence hasn't even begun in terms of a sector that I think is going to, 10x from where it is. So let's assume it has, a $2 trillion market cap today in terms of use case and applications. I think that could be 20 in 10 years. I think blockchain is going to fundamentally change how the world operates. And lots of use cases that sit on top of that, Bitcoin and crypto being probably the most current one, but I think there's lots more. I think, cyber is going to change and continue to grow. Quantum computing, there's such an exciting time to be a graduate, by the way, in coming out of school. But I don't think necessarily that these are obvious to everybody yet, what the long-term effects are going to look like. And we haven't even gone into what's going to happen in autonomous vehicles, AR, VR, and I don't mean it in a buzzword way. I mean it there's some big shifts. So as big as the internet, right, was, and then there can maybe cloud computing, there's 10 of these things happening at the same time. And I think that's going to play out in a pretty massive way and lead to more of a global arms race around where these enterprises are going to sit, which will lead to geopolitical tensions are going to be kind of more acute, because if you can control some of this data, you can control, and these companies, you kind of control a lot more political power. So I think that's going to mesh a lot more than it has in the past too, which will be, means policy is going to matter, and how these kind of companies are governed and regulated is going to matter also. I don't know if that answers the question, but it's it's a super exciting time to be in technology. But I don't think people have quite grasped the speed that things are happening at yet.
Right. So with the volume of information that's out there, how do you cull that down into something that you can execute against as far as a leader, and are some tips that you have as far as just
I think you need a balance between bottom-up, fact-based like kind of hardcore research reading with serendipity, right? Like I think you need to leave some space for serendipity where you can spend time with people that have what Art Coviel used to call privileged insights around the world. So like, how I do it is I have subject matter experts in each of these fields who are probably at the top of the field. And I spend time with them to understand what they know and figure out like what's the first principles of each of these sectors. And for me personally, it's important that we can do things in a mutually beneficial way in society, that it helps everyone, right? So I'm passionate about that. And then, you got to do your own reading and your own homework to make sure you're not just riding off somebody else. Like nothing replaces doing the work.
Sure.
And I think we're living in, I was having a conversation with somebody this week about like their kids are going to college, and I have an opinion that it doesn't matter anymore where you go to college because you're going to have to learn something new every year. Like if you really want to stay pace with the new economy,
sure,
and like learning is going to change. So, nothing beats doing the work, and kind of participating in order to learn. So how do you do that when everyone's overscheduled, over emailed, overworked? You got to make sure you're hiring great people. Right? You got to make sure you're recruiting. Like people say you need great talent, but the truth is you need great talent before you can afford them. So they have to believe in the vision. That's why purpose is going to matter in work more and more and more as we move forward. So, the macro trends and down to the day-to-day and research are all very much intertwined, more than they have been, where like if you were in one sector before, other things didn't affect you. Well, it's kind of, more mesh now than it is segregated.
Talk a little bit about just kind of your philosophy around hiring talent. That's a huge part of what a leader needs to be focused on. But talk a little bit about your thoughts around that.
Yeah, I think it changes. It's changed for me in the sense that it's different when you're an entrepreneur versus an executive, right? Like so, and that transition happens as your company grows, where entrepreneurial people have a great ability to sell people on the vision of why they should come build something with you. I think when you're an executive, it's more narrower and functional around, I got to get a person in to solve a particular, so you go from generalist to kind of functional specialist. I think the majority of people are not very good at hiring. I think, in my experience, I'm not talking about myself here, I'm saying my experience in general. I think there's certain people we found in the company who are very good at hiring, maybe not good at managing. I mean, people are very good at managing, but not necessarily good at hiring. I think there's a presumption that a manager is a good person at hiring. It's very rare to get both that are excellent. That's very hard. So, for me, the vision was the most important thing to be able to articulate clearly, and how you were going to behave with the culture of the company was the biggest thing to get right in order to recruit the right people. The majority of people you want to get on board have lots of options. So in order to make you choose them, you got to connect to something personally, and that's vision and mission. So that was the secret for me anyway of what I focused on. And it's very easy to make that connection in security because you're protecting people every day. So not so much in other industries. But that was kind of what we focused on, and understood that it was a sale. We were just as much like, selling the candidate as for the ones you need, you should be selling, not buying, So we were kind of clear on that early on, and you can't outsource it, So as a founder and CEO, it's like all my mistakes came back to a hire I got wrong. And all the things that went well came back to a hire that we got right, and we were fortunate. So I think placing it at like, and having a process, really, really diligent about it. And people talk about, hire slow and fire fast and those things. I think it's like easier said than done. Like it depends on the stage of your business. It depends on your capitalization, depends on your resources. It depends on where you're at in the journey. Because some people are in a crisis situation, they need different type of help than in a high growth situation where you've growing pains. And so making sure that the temperament of the person was right for the stage.
Good. So you mentioned a book you recommended for on the board side of things. Any other books that you recommend to leaders that?
Yeah, I mean, I have a whole list actually. It depends on for which things. I mean, I personally love biographies. So I like people's stories appeal to me. So like, I've read, Sam Walton's story, and I think if you're an entrepreneur, Bob Iger's book is really good about Disney, and I found that super fascinating. 0 to 1 with Peter Thiel I found that really interesting on the product side in particular. And I think having a broad range of reading is important, not just to read business books only. I think, if I was in a startup today, I would be actively reading on health and wellness. Like I would be gobbling that up, because that's what your team is going to need. And you need to grow at a rate that's faster than the growth rate of your company in order to be available as a leader for them. So I think it depends on the situation. COVID was like, you're reading about wartime stuff. Sure. So I think making sure that you're not just kind of gravitating to reading what you'd like to read, and forcing yourself kind of out of your comfort zone into things that you wouldn't typically, and you'll get some different insights that way.
Good. Yeah, that's a great thought. So what, you're in the technology field. I'm sure that, are you naturally more of an analog as far as in processing things, or are you a digital guy?
That's a great question. I think both. Both. Yeah. Like I like to read things kind of, hard copy, but also read digitally. I do both. I think it depends. I try to focus on what's the best way to maximize the time. So like, and when I get the time so I think it depends. I'm very ruthless about calendar, and I wasn't for a long time. So I think the biggest change I had was, making sure that my time and my initiatives were matched up. And when you're building a company, that's seriously difficult. So discipline there kind of really helped me. And so obviously digital calendar, but I have a book here, a notebook in front of me. So both,
So outside of work, what do you enjoy doing to recharge?
My family is like, my wife love to travel and go places. I've got 2 children, and my eldest is on the autism spectrum. So spend a lot of time trying to learn about that and make the world a better place for people who have autism. There's lots of nonprofit projects I'm involved in that are super interesting. And crypto is an area, even though it's like I just am super fascinated and bullish on that as a sector. So that's kind of like a crypto for nonprofit is a passion project of mine, about how we can use some of the DeFi yield opportunities for nonprofits, think about fundraising differently. So so it's not really separate anymore. It's like, and I love to play golf. I love to play golf too. I don't have as much time as I'd like for that, but I do play golf.
So what parting advice would you give a new or up and coming leader?
Be kind to yourself and be kind to the people you meet.
Great. Well, you mentioned that you're part of some nonprofits. Is there any that you would like to mention? And
sure. Anyone who can support Autism Speaks in any way, shape, or form, whether it's do a walk, I would really appreciate that. I have a friend who got diagnosed with ALS, and I think the ALS Foundation as well do amazing things. And I think supporting any nonprofit is good. Whatever one's closest to your heart, go do some work for them. And I think your life is more fulfilled when you do that. Get out of the day-to-day of building the company, even though it's hard.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Aidan. I really have enjoyed our conversation. I know that your insights are going to be helpful to those that are listening, and wish you continued success in all you're doing.
Thank you for having me. It was great fun.
Thank you for listening to the Motivated to Lead podcast. Please subscribe on iTunes. You can also see a video version of this interview at motivatedtolead.com. This podcast is brought to you by SEMA Partners, helping you find your next great leader.